Morning, guys. It's about 6 a.m. Trying to be a little quiet because Claire's sleeping in the other room. But we're going to do a vlog today. It's going to be a fun one. We have to move and sort a bunch of calves today. We're going to feed this morning.
It is 4:40 in the morning and 12 degrees below zero, and a man named Nothing You'd Recognize is already awake because a heifer somewhere in a dark pasture is trying to give birth to a calf that might freeze to death within 11 minutes of hitting the snow. There is no manager to call. There is no shift to hand off to. He has not had a Saturday off in 19 years, and he will not have one this week either. You picture a cowboy and you probably picture a hat and a horse and a sunset. What you don't picture is a man checking a thermometer at 4 a.m. and doing math in his head, because at -20, a wet newborn calf can die of exposure before its mother finishes licking it clean. That's the job, not the hat, the math. The alarm most ranch hands set is 4:30, sometimes earlier during calving season, which runs roughly January through March across much of the northern range. You'd start there too. Boots on a cold floor, coffee poured into a thermos that will be empty and useless by 7. The bunkhouse smells like wood smoke and wet leather and yesterday's coffee grounds nobody rinsed out. Outside, the diesel truck coughs twice before it turns over. That's not weather. That's the actual sound of the morning starting. Weekends, as a concept, mostly do not exist on a working cattle operation. Cattle don't know it's Sunday. A cow calving at 2 a.m. on Christmas doesn't wait for the holiday to end, and hands who've worked ranches from Montana to the Texas Panhandle describe the same thing in nearly identical language when interviewers ask about days off. There aren't really days off during calving. There's just less to do on a good day. On a bad day, everyone works. Consider what sick day means here. You wake up with a fever of 101 and a dry cough. In most jobs, that's a text to a manager and a day under blankets. On a ranch, that same fever means you still climb into a saddle, because there might be only 2 or 3 hands covering thousands of acres and hundreds of head. And if you don't check the north pasture, nobody does. One longtime foreman, describing this to a rural journalist, put it plainly. The cows don't know you're sick. Now add the snow. A blizzard that shuts down a city, closes the schools, cancels the flights. That same storm, on a ranch, is not a day off. It's the single most dangerous workday of the year, because cattle drift with the wind, piling into fence corners and coulees where they can suffocate or freeze in a mass, sometimes 20 or 30 animals deep. So the crew saddles up and rides directly into the blizzard that everyone else is hiding from, because the alternative is finding half the herd dead in a ditch come Tuesday. You'd feel it first in your face. Skin that goes from painful to numb in about 4 minutes at these wind chills, the kind where exposed cheeks blister like sunburn by the time you're back at the barn. Eyelashes freeze together, snot freezes in your moustache if you have one, and still the horse has to be caught, saddled and pointed into the wind, because that's where the cattle went. Winter isn't even the whole story. Come June, the same crew that spent March pulling calves out of snowbanks is out haying under a sun that pushes past 100 degrees on the plains, cutting and baling feed that has to last the herd through the next winter, because there's no version of this job where you get to rest between seasons. The work just changes shape. Summer means sunburn instead of frostbite, dust instead of ice, and irrigation lines that have to be moved by hand at 6 p.m. because the heat makes midday work dangerous for the horses. Then there's the branding. Usually spring, when calves born back in that brutal January are roped, vaccinated and marked in a single exhausting stretch that can run a crew 12 straight hours on horseback and on foot in the dirt. Neighbouring ranches still trade labour for this in a lot of cattle country, hands riding over to help brand 200 head one weekend and having the favour return the next. An informal economy that has apparently outlasted almost everything else about how ranching used to work. And running underneath all of it, quietly, is the predator math nobody puts on a brochure. Wolves reintroduced across parts of the northern Rockies, and coyotes nearly everywhere else, mean a rancher can lose calves overnight to something that was never on the day's task list, discovered only at the next morning's count, when a number that should be 214 comes back as 212. Some outfits keep guard dogs, some ride the perimeter after dark, and some just accept the loss as a cost of the land itself, the way you'd accept a hailstorm. There is also, notably, almost no technology bailing anyone out of any of this. GPS ear tags and drone flyovers exist on the biggest operations, sure, and some outfits have started using them to cut down on the miles a hand has to ride checking cattle. But on the mid-size and small family operations that still make up a large share of American cattle ranching, according to industry surveys, the primary tool for finding a sick cow in an 800-acre pasture is still a person on a horse, using their eyes, because a calf going quiet and hunching its back in a specific way is a signal no sensor reliably catches yet. Here's the part that surprises people who've never lived it. This isn't a story about misery. Ask the hands themselves in the interviews and oral histories that exist on the subject, and a striking number of them will tell you, almost defensively, that they wouldn't trade it. A wrangler in her mid-20s, working a spread reportedly running close to 800 head, described pulling a calf at 3 a.m. in a windstorm and then, 20 minutes later, standing in the dark listening to it breathe for the first time and calling that the best 15 minutes of her month. That's not a complaint. That's closer to a religion. The pay, by most public accounting, does not explain the loyalty. Entry-level ranch hands in the western United States are commonly reported to earn somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 to $45,000 a year, often with housing and sometimes meals included. Figures that vary a great deal by state, operation size, and whether the position is seasonal or year-round. That is, by any measure, modest money for a job that can put you on horseback for 12 to 14 hours in weather that kills people who aren't dressed for it. So, if it isn't the paycheck, something else is doing the recruiting. Part of it, according to the people who've studied ranch culture and the hands who live it, is the specific kind of tired it produces. Not the fluorescent light tired of an office, but a bone-deep, earned exhaustion that comes with a clear tally attached to it. 50 calves born, 3 saved from a coolie, 1 bad breech delivery you and the vet worked for 40 minutes to fix. You can point at the herd at dusk and know physically what your body did that day. Most jobs can't offer that kind of receipt. But the ledger cuts both ways, and it's worth sitting inside the cost for a minute before the loyalty makes sense. Ranching is regularly cited among the more physically dangerous civilian occupations in the country, with injuries from large animals, machinery, and falls from horseback showing up consistently in agricultural safety data. Add the isolation. Some operations put the nearest hand a 20-minute truck ride away, the nearest town an hour past that, and the nearest hospital further still. A broken wrist at 5 a.m. in January means a truck ride you take yourself, wincing, foot on the gas with your good hand because the cattle still need checking on the way. And then there's the part almost nobody outside the industry thinks about. The animals you lose anyway. Every experienced hand carries a private list of the calves that didn't make it, despite everything. The ones pulled too late or born into cold that simply won that particular night. That list doesn't come with therapy or a debrief. It comes with feeding the rest of the herd the next morning, because that's what tomorrow requires, regardless of how last night went. There's a family cost too. One hand's mention almost in passing, like it's too obvious to dwell on. Kids on working ranches often grow up doing chores before school starts, feeding bottle calves at 6 a.m. in the dark before the bus arrives, and missing school events because Calving doesn't check a calendar for a spring recital. Marriages on isolated operations reportedly carry their own strain. built around two people who might see each other for 20 minutes at dinner during the worst stretch of the year, both too tired to talk about anything beyond the count. It's not a hidden cost, it's just one nobody outside the life is expected to understand, so nobody explains it much. So why do they stay? Ask that question directly, and the answers cluster around a few recurring ideas across the interviews and oral histories available on the subject. There's the multi-generational pull, hands whose grandfathers and great-grandfathers worked the same stretch of land, for whom quitting would feel less like changing jobs and more like breaking a chain. There's the specific, almost meditative rhythm of moving cattle at sunrise, with nobody talking, just hooves and breath and the particular grey light before the sun clears the ridge. And there's something harder to name, a sense that the work is real in a way that resists modern replacement, that no algorithm carves a heifer or reads a storm front through the smell of the air changing. Picture yourself at the end of one of these days. Not the good day with 50 healthy calves, but the ordinary one. 9 hours in the saddle, fingers that took 2 hours to warm up after lunch, a horse that's earned its extra scoop of grain and gets it. You peel off boots that are frozen at the ankle from wading a half-iced creek to pull a stuck steer, and you eat something reheated, standing at a counter, because sitting feels like admitting the day is done, and some part of you is already running tomorrow's list. Fence line to check, 2 cows still due, a weather report that's using the word advisory a little too casually for comfort. That list never actually clears, it just resets every single morning, whether it's a Tuesday or a Sunday or the day after Thanksgiving. There is no calendar on a working ranch that anyone gets to opt out of, only a season that's harder and a season that's slightly less hard. The people who last inside that rhythm for 20, 30, 40 years aren't the ones who tolerate it best. They were the ones who somewhere along the way stopped counting it as a sacrifice at all. So maybe the real question isn't how they survive without weekends or sick days or snow days. Maybe it's whether a life measured entirely in a herd's needs, rather than your own calendar, counts as a harder life, or simply a different definition of a full one. Depends who you ask, and depends what they're standing in when you ask it. Somewhere right now, at an hour almost nobody else is awake to witness, someone is already walking out into the cold to find out if last night's heifer made it. No overtime pay for that walk, no supervisor tracking the hours, just a flashlight beam cutting across frozen ground, a horse's breath fogging in the cold, and a job description that was never actually written down anywhere, because everyone who takes it already understands the terms before they say yes.